My name is Ava Morgan, and according to my family, I was born a disappointment. From the moment I could walk, it seemed like I was walking wrong. Too clumsy, too quiet, too curious about the wrong things. While my siblings excelled at sports, academics, and networking with the right people, I preferred books, strange questions, and dreams that didn't fit neatly into their perfect suburban mold. At first, they tolerated me with tight smiles and whispered jokes at my expense. Ava's just different, my mother would say at dinner parties, as if explaining away a defective product. My father, a man who measured worth in trophies and salaries, simply pretended I didn't exist unless I was an embarrassment he could scold. I thought, maybe, if I tried harder, I could earn a place at their table. So I did. I studied until my eyes blurred. I forced myself into sports I hated. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I became a ghost in my own skin. It didn't matter. No matter how hard I tried, I was never enough. The final blow came the day of my high school graduation. My siblings posed for photos with scholarship awards and Ivy League acceptance letters. I stood alone, holding a modest diploma from a community college program they didn't even bother attending. That night, over a family dinner I wasn't invited to, they made their decision. "You're on your own now," my father said, tossing a crumpled check for a laughable amount onto the kitchen counter. "Time to stop being our problem." My mother didn't meet my eyes. My siblings smirked, and just like that, I was disowned, discarded, forgotten. The first night alone was the hardest. A duffel bag of clothes, a few $100s, no safety net, no plan. I slept in a broken-down car I bought with what little cash I had, the windows cracked and the seat permanently stuck in an awkward tilt. I cried once, maybe twice. Then I stopped. Because crying wasn't going to build a life, only fire would. I worked 3 jobs: waitressing, cleaning offices, tutoring spoiled rich kids who barely glanced at me. I ate dollar store ramen and slept 3 hours a night. I studied entrepreneurship online in stolen moments between shifts. Slowly, painfully, I scraped together enough to start a tiny consulting business, helping struggling local shops adapt to the digital world. Websites, marketing, social media. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And it grew. Word spread. Clients multiplied. I reinvested every cent back into the business. No fancy clothes, no new car, just grit and ambition. 5 years later, Ava Morgan Consulting was a multi-million-dollar firm with offices in 3 cities. We helped small businesses become giants. We turned underdogs into market leaders. And no one laughed at useless Ava anymore. I didn't think about my family much during those years. They were ghosts in a life I no longer lived, until the letter arrived. A crisp white envelope, expensive paper, my mother's perfect handwriting. "Family emergency," it read. Curiosity, and maybe a flicker of old pain, made me open it. Bankruptcy, foreclosure, scandal. My father's impeccable company collapsed under the weight of fraud and incompetence. My siblings' cushy jobs, secured through nepotism, vanished overnight. And now they needed help. My help. I stared at the letter for a long time, feeling nothing. No rage, no satisfaction, just a cold, clinical detachment. They hadn't written to apologize. They had written because they thought I was still the desperate, pathetic girl who would crawl back for a crumb of validation. They didn't realize that Ava Morgan was dead, and someone far stronger had taken her place. I decided to meet them. Curiosity deserved that much. We agreed on a neutral location, a generic coffee shop halfway between their crumbling estate and my glittering downtown office. They arrived early, dressed in designer clothes they could no longer afford, smiles, brittle and desperate. "Ava!" my mother gushed, reaching for a hug I didn't return. "You look successful," my father said, the word catching in his throat like poison. My siblings stared at me like they were trying to recognize a ghost. I ordered a coffee. Black. No sugar. Then I sat down and listened. How hard things had been. How unfair. How the world was cruel to good people like them. How they needed a small loan to get back on their feet. how they were willing to forgive the past if I could just help the family in this time of need. I listened to it all with the patience of a saint. And when they finally ran out of lies and self-pity, I smiled, the kind of smile that says, checkmate. I'm afraid, I said, standing smoothly. I'm too busy building a future to rescue the past. I dropped a crisp dollar bill on the table, payment for my coffee, and without another word, I walked out into the sunlight. Free, stronger, unbreakable. Walking out of that coffee shop felt like shedding the last remnants of the chains they had wrapped around me. I thought that was the end of it. I thought they would fade back into the shadows where they belonged. I underestimated their desperation. Over the next few weeks, the attempts escalated. My mother sent tearful emails recounting every fond memory she could fabricate. My father's tone shifted from arrogant to pleading. My siblings tried guilt trips, reminding me of blood ties and family obligations. It would have been laughable if it weren't so pitiful. I didn't respond. Silence, I realized, was the most powerful answer. Then came the social media posts. Carefully curated pity parties, portraying themselves as victims abandoned by their cold-hearted daughter. Friends and acquaintances tagged me, sending me messages filled with veiled judgment. Poor them. How cruel Ava must be. They didn't know the half of it. I stayed silent, because sometimes dignity speaks louder than any rebuttal. But behind the scenes, I moved strategically. I purchased the debt tied to their foreclosed estate through a shell company. I bought the rights to their failing business assets. I secured quiet ownership over every financial piece they were still trying to cling to. Not to destroy them, to remind them, every day, who held the power now. When they tried to sell off pieces of the estate to stay afloat, they ran into a wall. Me. When? They sought investors to restart a new venture, every door closed. Because behind those doors? Me. I never once had to raise my voice. Never had to send a threat. My success was the blade. My silence, the twist, and it was poetic. They had discarded me like trash. Now they lived in the world I built, breathing the air I allowed them to. One rainy afternoon, my brother, the golden child, showed up at the lobby of my downtown office. Security called up, asking if I wanted to see him. I thought about it for a moment, then I told them to escort him out. I watched from the corner of my office window as he stood in the rain, drenched and furious, pounding on the glass like a caged animal. And I turned away, because revenge wasn't about grand gestures. It was about indifference. Later that evening, as I sipped wine in my penthouse overlooking the city skyline, my assistant handed me a package. No return address. Inside, a framed photo. A family portrait from years ago. Smiling faces, perfect clothes, perfect lies. On the back, a note in my mother's handwriting. We're still family. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I tossed it into the fireplace and watched it burn. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some are meant to light the way forward. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't seeking approval. I had built a life defined by my own rules, my own grit, my own dreams, and nothing they said or did could take that from me. Breaking free wasn't a moment. It was 1,000 choices made in silence, in strength, in defiance. And every day I chose freedom. Every day I chose me. Freedom was never meant to be the final destination. It was the launch pad. With my past buried in ashes and my future stretched out like an endless horizon, I turned my attention to building something bigger than revenge, an empire no one could tear down. Ava Morgan Consulting expanded rapidly. I bought out competitors who once sneered at me. I acquired prime real estate not to flaunt, but to cement my presence in cities that had once ignored me. My company wasn't just another player anymore. It was the player. But I didn't stop at business. I created a private investment firm dedicated to funding other outcasts, those who had been underestimated, discarded, forgotten, the artists, the inventors, the thinkers who didn't fit the traditional mold. I gave them what no one gave me, a chance, and in return, they built wonders. Startups rose from back alleys. New technologies disrupted industries controlled by the old elite. Social programs revitalized broken communities. Every success was a middle finger to the world that once told people like us to stay small. I wasn't just succeeding, I was changing the game. It didn't take long for the media to notice. Profiles in Forbes, interviews on primetime news, invitations to galas and summits. They wanted a soundbite, a sob story, a redemption arc. I gave them nothing, because my story wasn't about redemption. It was about evolution. They still didn't understand. They thought success meant joining their world. I was busy creating my own. Meanwhile, my family's descent accelerated. With every failed venture, every closed door, every burned bridge, they sank deeper into irrelevance. The same acquaintances who once praised their perfect family now crossed the street to avoid them. One day, I received an invitation, not from them, but from the bank auctioning off the last remnants of their estate. Their once proud mansion, gutted and vandalized, up for public bidding. I didn't hesitate. I bought it. Not to live in, to tear it down. And in its place, I built a community center, a haven for underprivileged youth, dreamers who needed a sanctuary. From the cruelty of a world obsessed with pedigree and appearances, I named it the Phoenix House, because some things must burn before they can rise. I never once spoke their names publicly, never acknowledged them in interviews, never wasted breath on their downfall. Because true victory isn't about revenge posts or public shaming. It's about becoming so unbreakable, so undeniable, that your existence alone rewrites the narrative. And mine had. Late one evening, standing at the grand opening of the Phoenix House, I watched as kids laughed and explored a world that once would have been barred to them. A young girl, barefoot, determined, raced up to me, her eyes wide with possibility. "Did you build this?" she asked. "We built it," I corrected, smiling. And in her smile, in her belief, I found something I hadn't realized I was still searching. For not approval, not validation, peace. The kind you earn, the kind no one can give you or take away. I had broken free, and in doing so, I had built a freedom big enough to share. Success reshaped me. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about leading, about proving that a different way of doing things could survive and thrive in a world addicted to power games. Ava Morgan Consulting evolved beyond its original mission. We became a force for rebuilding, not just disrupting. We didn't just help underdogs rise. We helped them build structures so strong the old guard couldn't tear them down. We launched Ava Ventures, a global incubator for innovators with ideas that terrified traditional industries. We created scholarships, endowments, training programs for women, minorities, and anyone the system tried to overlook. And we did it without compromise, without selling our souls for headlines. The more we built, the more the world noticed. Invitations came from governments, asking for advice on modernizing infrastructure. Universities begged me to speak. Foundations wanted partnerships, but I remembered what the world did to those who got too comfortable. I kept my circle tight, I kept my vision clear, and I kept moving forward. Meanwhile, the ruins of my family's legacy crumbled to dust. Rumors floated through the industry, my siblings trying to open boutique businesses doomed to fail, my father drowning in lawsuits, my mother clinging to the last shreds of her socialite facade. None of it mattered to me anymore. The past wasn't my anchor. It was my fuel. One day, a reporter cornered me after a keynote speech, shoving a microphone into my face. "Ava," she said breathlessly, "do you have any comment about your estranged family's recent struggles?" I looked her dead in the eye and smiled. "I don't live in the past," I said simply, and I walked away, leaving her blinking in the spotlight. Because the best revenge was no revenge at all. It was thriving so loudly that their whispers became irrelevant. As my empire solidified, I began planning for the future, not just mine, but for the next generation. Wellspring Academy was born, a network of educational centers dedicated to teaching critical thinking, resilience, and leadership to youth worldwide. We didn't just teach them how to succeed, we taught them how to question, to innovate, to lead. With integrity. The old world hated it. Because a world full of independent thinkers is a world that doesn't bow easily, and that was exactly the world I intended to leave behind. Years later, standing on the balcony of Wellspring's flagship campus, watching students debate fiercely below, I realized something profound. They didn't know my story. They didn't know about the broken girl sleeping in a rusted-out car. They didn't know about the humiliation, the betrayal, the nights spent wondering if survival was even possible, and they didn't need to, because my pain wasn't the point. The future was. Somewhere in the distance, a new sun was rising, brighter, bolder, unchained, and I knew, with a certainty carved in fire and forged in solitude, that Ava Morgan's legacy wasn't written in boardrooms or bank accounts. It was written in the unstoppable march of every soul who refused to be told they were less. We weren't broken, we weren't useless. We were builders of a new world, and we were just getting started. Building Wellspring Academy was just the beginning. As we planted seeds of critical thinking and courage around the world, the ripple effects became tidal waves. Students launched their own startups. Activists founded movements. Communities redefined what success looked like. Wellspring wasn't just a network of schools anymore. It was a revolution of minds. Of course, the old world didn't crumble quietly. Corporations clinging to outdated hierarchies, politicians desperate to retain control, media giants addicted to fear-mongering, they all declared war on what we represented. Whispers of radicalization and destabilization filled the airwaves. They accused us of brainwashing, of dismantling traditions, of threatening the natural order. Good. We weren't here to play nice. We were here to uproot the rot. The attacks grew bolder. Hackers targeted Wellspring's networks. Lawsuits appeared. Overnight, frivolous but dangerous. In some regions, governments shut down our campuses under flimsy pretenses. They thought they could scare us. They thought wrong. I adapted. We decentralized everything. Curriculums open-sourced, leadership structures flattened, resources distributed globally. Take down one center and 100 more would rise elsewhere. You can't kill an idea whose time has come, and Wellspring had become an unstoppable idea. Still, I wasn't naive. Every movement has its vulnerabilities. Charisma fades, popularity shifts, betrayals happen. I needed to ensure Wellspring wouldn't just survive without me. It had to transcend me. I established the Wellspring Trust, a fully autonomous, leaderless entity governed by thousands of micro-councils made up of students, alumni, educators, and community leaders. No single point of failure. No single name to assassinate. The revolution would continue, even if I disappeared tomorrow. And that was the goal all along. One night, I stood atop a reclaimed skyscraper in what used to be a forgotten industrial wasteland, now a thriving wellspring hub, and watched the city pulse with life. A message came through my private line, an invitation, a secret summit of global influencers, billionaires, monarchs, legacy CEOs, those who still believed they ran the world. They wanted to discuss terms, which meant they wanted to bribe me, threaten me, or co-opt me. I smiled. They still hadn't learned. I would attend, not to negotiate, but to send a message. The future isn't up for sale. It belongs to those brave enough to build it, and we had only just begun. The summit was held in a remote estate, a fortress hidden behind manicured forests and layers of private security. They spared no expense in appearances. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, champagne served by silent staff. But underneath the glitter, the air reeked of desperation. I arrived alone, dressed simply in black, no entourage, no armor, but my resolve. Whispers followed me down the gilded halls, curious stares, thinly veiled contempt. Good. Let them underestimate me. The summit. Convened in a grand hall, a circular table where the old titans of the world sat like kings planning the future of peasants. Only this time the peasants had started writing their own destiny. A heavy-set man with a gold watch that screamed insecurity opened the meeting. "Miss Morgan," he said smoothly, "we appreciate your disruptive enthusiasm, but surely you see the risks of chaos without strong hands to guide it." Translation: Join us or be crushed. I smiled politely and said nothing. Another spoke up, a woman with the sharp eyes of a vulture. Wellspring is inspiring, yes, but without structure, movements collapse. We offer you resources, protection, legitimacy. Translation: surrender your autonomy. Still, I said nothing. They grew bolder. Think of the children, one crooned. Without oversight, without the wisdom of experience, you risk leading them into anarchy. Translation: let us own your future. When they realized I wouldn't take the bait, they turned to threats, subtle at first. Then more blatant, investigations into my businesses. Asset freezes, character assassinations, accidents. They promised it all, unless I bent the knee. When they finished their monologue of intimidation, the room fell silent, waiting for my surrender. Rose slowly, placing my palms flat on the table, meeting each of their gazes without fear. You mistake me, I said quietly. I didn't come here to negotiate. They shifted uncomfortably. I came here to warn you. I reached into my jacket and slid a sleek tablet onto the table. With a tap, it came to life, streaming real-time footage of Wellspring rallies, community projects, startup launches, protests in cities I'd never even set foot in. Millions of people, united not by loyalty to me, but by belief in a better world. You can't buy this, I said. You can't kill it. You can't stop it. Their faces paled as the realization sank in. I smiled. The future doesn't belong to you. I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving them choking on the dust of their own irrelevance. Outside, the night air was cool and alive with unseen energy. I felt no triumph, no gloating, only purpose. The old world was crumbling. Not with a bang, but with a whimper, and we were already building something new from the ruins. Not perfect, not easy, but ours. Days later, the attacks came as promised. Smear articles, legal battles, digital assaults. We were ready. Wellspring communities. Closed ranks. Leaders emerged where others fell. Innovations outpaced sabotage. Truth outshined propaganda, and the movement surged stronger than ever, because once people taste freedom, they don't forget. Once minds are opened, they don't close. And once a spark ignites, it spreads. Unstoppable, unforgiving, unforgettable, and somewhere standing in the eye of the storm she helped create, Ava Morgan smiled, because she knew they had tried to bury her. But she wasn't a seed, she was the wildfire. In the aftermath of the summit, something fundamental shifted. The old powers realized brute force wouldn't kill the movement we'd built. So they changed tactics, they tried to co-opt it. Flattery replaced threats. Invitations to collaborate flooded in. Offers of partnership, wrapped in golden promises of mutual benefit. But I knew better. Collaboration with corruption is just a slower death. Instead of fighting on their terms, I took Wellspring into new territory, places they couldn't touch. We began constructing autonomous cities, experimental hubs where Wellspring principles guided everything from education to economics to governance. These cities didn't just thrive, they exploded with innovation. Crime rates plummeted, literacy soared, sustainable energy became the norm. Art, science, and entrepreneurship flourished without bureaucratic chains. People noticed. At first, they came as visitors, skeptics curious about the Wellspring miracles. Then they stayed, in droves, families fleeing broken systems, young visionaries, hungry for opportunity, veterans tired of fighting wars for profit, refugees seeking dignity, not charity. Wellspring cities became beacons, proof that another world was possible, tangible, alive, and that terrified the old guard more than any riot or revolution ever could. As our influence grew, so did their panic. Trade sanctions, media blackouts, cyber attacks. They tried everything. But Wellspring wasn't a single entity they could bully or bribe. It was an ecosystem, a living idea. Every attempt to strangle us only seeded more outrage, more support, more momentum. One evening, standing atop a Wellspring tower overlooking a cityscape glittering with life and hope, I received a message, encrypted, Anonymous. Short. They're planning something bigger. I knew it was inevitable. When you can't control a fire, you try to suffocate the oxygen feeding it. They wouldn't just attack Wellspring cities individually. They would unite against us, a global effort to crush what they couldn't understand, and they would fail, because they were still fighting battles for control. While we were building a civilization based on freedom, I gathered my closest advisors. Leaders from every Wellspring hub, innovators, teachers, engineers, activists, warriors of a different kind. Together, we strategized. Not how to fight them, how to outlast them. Because in the end, they would burn themselves out fighting a ghost. And we would be there, steady and strong, ready to inherit the future they could no longer hold. The final war wouldn't be won with guns or courts or propaganda. It would be won in the hearts of people who had tasted freedom and would never settle. For chains again, the global effort against us began with precision. Coordinated cyber attacks targeting Wellspring's communication grids, legal campaigns accusing us of sedition, economic blockades trying to starve our cities. For a moment, the pressure was immense. Fear crept into our communities like smoke under a door. Doubts flickered. But Wellspring wasn't built on fear. It was built on resilience. And so, we adapted. We decentralized further. We made every city, every outpost, every project self-sufficient. If one fell, others would stand. Knowledge was shared, openly. Resources redistributed instantly. Leaders emerged organically from the ground up, not dictated by any central command. When they shut down our communication satellites, we launched new ones, crowdfunded, community-owned. When they froze our bank accounts, we built decentralized financial systems beyond their reach. They attacked the walls, not realizing Wellspring had no walls to breach. It was air, it was light, it was everywhere, and it was unstoppable. The tipping point came when entire regions began defecting from the old world order. Small nations declared themselves Wellspring territories, adopting our governance models, our educational frameworks, our sustainable economies. The old powers panicked. They tried military pressure. They tried diplomatic isolation. They tried sabotage from within, but every attempt only revealed their desperation. Every act of aggression pushed more people toward us, not away, because once you've glimpsed freedom, the chains you once wore look obscene. I traveled constantly during this period, not as a ruler, but as a witness. I met with local councils in Wellspring cities. I attended student debates that put world leaders to shame. I worked alongside farmers experimenting with regenerative crops, engineers building energy grids from recycled waste, artists painting murals of hope on walls once pockmarked by bullets. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, betrayals, failures, but they weren't cracks in the foundation. They were part of the growth. Because we weren't building a utopia. We were building something real, something human, something that could endure. One night, standing before a crowd of tens of thousands in a newly liberated territory, I spoke words I had carried for years. They will tell you we are dreamers. They will tell you we are dangerous. They will tell you we are naive. I paused, letting the words sink in. And they are right. Because dreams are dangerous to those who profit from despair. Because hope is dangerous to those who worship fear. Because change is dangerous to those who believe power is their birthright. The crowd roared, not with blind fanaticism, but with the deep, resonant thunder of people who had found their voice and who would never be silenced again. As I left the stage that night, a young woman ran up to me, tears in her eyes. "You changed my life," she said. I shook my head. "No," I told her, smiling. "You changed your own." And that was the truth. I hadn't given them freedom. I had simply helped them remember it was theirs all along. The world had changed, but the transformation was incomplete. The old structures hadn't collapsed entirely. They had simply retreated, regrouped, adapted. They lurked behind new logos, new politicians, new distractions. If Wellspring was to endure, truly endure, it had to offer not just refuge from the past, but a blueprint for the future. And so we began the next phase. Integration. No longer content to exist on the edges, Wellspring leaders and communities stepped boldly into global arenas, economics, diplomacy, culture. We offered alternatives: decentralized trade networks, transparent governance models, education systems rooted in inquiry and ethics. Some nations resisted, some embraced. Most watched cautiously, wondering if we could deliver on the promise we to you carried. We did more than deliver. We redefined what was possible. Within a decade, Wellspring-influenced territories represented a third of the world's population. Not through conquest, not through coercion, through choice. Because given a real choice, people don't choose fear. They choose hope. They choose dignity. They choose freedom. I spent my days now not as a CEO or a revolutionary figurehead, but as a mentor, a storyteller, a builder of bridges between old-world pragmatism and new-world ideals. I no longer needed to command attention. The work spoke for itself. New cities rose, designed from scratch by their inhabitants, fueled by renewable energy, governed by councils anyone could participate in. Borders blurred, cultures intertwined, old divisions lost their venom, but it wasn't a utopia. There were mistakes. Corruption surfaced, power struggles emerged, human flaws remained, and that was good, because Wellspring was never about perfection. Was about the freedom to fail, the freedom to try again, the freedom to be human in all its messy, glorious possibility. The old powers, diminished but not extinct, tried one final gambit: fear-mongering. They spun narratives of chaos, instability, moral decay, but their words rang hollow. Because when people have clean water, quality education, access to opportunity, and a voice that matters, they don't listen to fear. They live their truth. One evening, watching a Wellspring cultural festival unfold, riot of color, music, invention, a young boy tugged at my sleeve. "Are you the lady who started all this?" he asked, eyes wide with wonder. I knelt down, smiling. "No," I said. "You are." Because every dream they chased, every injustice they challenged, every new idea they dared to believe in, that was the real Wellspring. And it no longer needed me. It belonged to them. To the future. And the future, I realized with a full heart, was finally, truly free. The future had arrived, messy, unpredictable, beautiful. Wellspring wasn't a movement anymore. It was woven into the fabric of everyday life across continents. It shaped education, economics, governance, even art. It was no longer revolutionary. It was normal, and in that normalization, its greatest triumph and its greatest risk emerged: complacency. The danger wasn't invasion or sabotage now. It was forgetting. Forgetting why we fought. Forgetting what we built. Forgetting that freedom, once won, must be protected every single day. I spent my final years traveling not as a leader or founder, but as a storyteller, reminding new generations of the fires we walked through, of the lies we tore down, of the costs we paid in silence and sacrifice. I told them about the nights sleeping in a broken car, the boardrooms filled with threats and condescension, the battles fought not with fists, but with patience, grit, and relentless hope. Because they needed to know. Because memory is armor. Because without roots, even the tallest tree falls. In the end, I faded the way I lived, not with fanfare, but with fierce, quiet purpose. I left no monuments, no statues, just letters, lessons, and a world a little freer than the one I was born into. One evening, watching the sunset over a Wellspring city buzzing with life, a young girl, no older than I had been when my family abandoned me, sat beside me. "Do you think it will last?" she asked, voice trembling between hope and fear. I smiled, feeling the weight of every moment that brought us here. "It will," I said, "if you make it." Because the future isn't a gift, it's a choice. A battle fought in classrooms, in town halls, in hearts, every day, by everyone. And as long as there are people brave enough to choose it, to fight for it, to build it again and again, Wellspring will never die. Freedom will never die, hope will never die, and neither will I, because I am not a person. I am an idea, an unbreakable, unstoppable, unforgettable idea. And ideas, once set free, never truly fade. They become the world.